So this is quite an interesting event. Again, ironically, I submitted a petition by e-petitions to the king, right? He's the King's Most Excellent Majesty. The Parliament always usually interpret the Bill of Rights. They try to interpret it so it's only the king petitioning the king, not petitioning the king or Parliament, which it actually does mean the king or Parliament when you read books like Herbert Broom, the lawyer, and things like that. But most people actually do accept it, if you are petitioning the king, to be literally straight off the paper, right? As the Bill of Rights Article 5, supposedly Article 5, that's meant to be the number of the article, says. I submitted, but I kind of got some personal information in there, and I didn't want to ask anyone that I didn't know, so I had to try and get signatures from people that I knew. So I put my family down, but then for the last signature, I kind of put, I just kind of, because I've been looking at the observation of due process of law, which says the community can petition the king, right, or Parliament, that's where it originates from. Really, in law, not the 1688 Bill of Rights, although they had the Statute of Westminster II, where you can complain directly to the king through the Statute of Westminster II to complain about a judge. But that's kind of, because they didn't always have Parliament, remember, you can always petition Parliament. So you kind of got the legal right to petition the king through any legal case anyway, without it being political. It could be even judicial, particularly if it's a point of law or a right, which if it's basically the judge is being corrupt or lying, right? Or if they're wrong. So, like, I kind of thought it was, but I read in the committee reports, I think it's the 1832 one off the top of my head, the Petitions Committee reports, that the petitions didn't used to be signed, right? They didn't used to have all the signatures on them from everyone. They didn't actually have to, they didn't have all the signatures. I think that's what George Strickland said when he was giving evidence to Robert Peel, right? He was saying that, like, someone would just write it, like, set it out in writing, because not everyone could write, and it would, like, be on behalf of the local community, right? So it would be like a claim or statement on behalf of the community, and it might be drafted by a lawyer or a solicitor or a clerk or a priest, a local clergy, or someone who could write. But they didn't all sign it. But then when the king was, like, saying that, you know, they weren't telling the truth, or, like, you know, the community did not actually want this or that, you know, so that, and that's why I was said that they started putting the signatures on, right? So I submitted this petition, and I put all Northern Ireland, I put, like, the community of Northern Ireland. Well, what was the petition about? Well, it was challenging human rights article on the right to privacy, Article 8, for all this stuff the government's doing at the moment, like digital ID, but also this, they're trying to have an automated judicial process where they can just access people's bank accounts and take money out of it, right? Now, it might be for people on benefits to start with, but the principle and idea of it is like, you know, if it's an investigatory process to gather evidence, right? If it's kind of like, if it's equivalent to a police investigation, right? So they can access your bank account, right? But they're doing it so that they can do automatic kind of like actions and judgments, right? Where you don't actually get a chance to, you know, submit a statement or like appear to defend yourself, right? So it's like, effectively, they're trying to bring in automatic judicial processes, similar to how Facebook and YouTube are enforcing their policy from overseas, which extends beyond the law, right? Beyond actually, so you're not doing anything illegal, but you're getting actions executed against you when you haven't done, and possibly even taking down all your videos and material, right? So that's all your work. They're your things and possessions, right? If you've got a YouTube channel, right, and it's got all your work on it and you don't have any other copies of it and YouTube just take it down, they're your things, they're your chattels, and their policy which says, oh yeah, like, you know, we own it or we can do what we want with it, are actually extending beyond the law. Because in England, unless you've committed a felony, right, you can't have your stuff taken off you by a direct judgment, right? And the thing is, YouTube aren't even taking you to court to claim that you broke the law. And they're not even taking you to court in a civil action to say that you broke their policy, right? They're not even going to court. They're just basically taking it off you, right? And this is to do with submit, consent, accept, agree. Now, the government absolutely love this, right? They think it's the best thing since sliced bread, and they're now enacting it into law. But all of these American platforms they're breaking the law, and no one's taking them to court. Now, here, ironically, just after I've submitted this petition to the King's Most Excellent Majesty, and anything that mentions the King, automatically they have to tell him about it. Like, any of the ministers of the Crown or the Privy Council, they've got to tell the King about it if it's got, anything written about the King on it. So like that's their oath, right? So it always gets to the King even when you mention it, right? So it's like, ironically now, today, they've come out with this. They've got this they've got this story in the news, right, about Northern Ireland. So I take that as, it's weird when, you throw stuff out there and you get some kind of point or response. This is like a Human Rights Act point of Northern Ireland. But this is not to do with the right to privacy. But this is a judgment that the Supreme Court have come out with now for Northern Ireland, right? The Supreme Court rules Christian-focused religious education taught in Northern Ireland schools is unlawful. The Christian religious education RE taught in schools in Northern Ireland is unlawful, the Supreme Court has ruled. In a unanimous judgment, the UK's highest court allowed an appeal by an unnamed father and daughter from Northern Ireland, right? So, I don't know how this father and daughter, where they get the lawyers from. I don't know where they get the money from, if it's pro bono or to get all these Human Rights Act claims. But why isn't anyone doing these Human Rights Act claims against Google and YouTube, Sergey Brin, against all this mobile phone companies and smartphones and things like that, right to privacy? There's no urgent social need for it. And they have definitely got an ulterior motive. And then Parliament are advertising all these platforms and they're trying to integrate it all together, right? I don't think the laws that Parliament are making, right, are compliant with any of the Human Rights Act. So, this is ironic. Now, let's go back we'll go back many years, over 20, 30 years. So when I was at school, right, I remember being in RE, religious education, at high school, and I didn't actually. Now, I don't have any dispute with this High Court judgment in the sense of the general principle of it, right? Because when I was at school, the whole point in RE, religious education, I was taught, was to learn about other religions, right? That was a point in it. So when I was at school, RE, religious education, you learn about different religions, right? I thought that was the point in it. Because that's what the subject is. Like, if you learn about history, you learn about different types of history, right? If you learn about religion, you learn about different religions. I thought that was the point of RE, was not your own religion, actually, but to learn about different religions, that there are different religions, right? That's what I thought the point in it was. Obviously, if you go to a Catholic school or a Protestant school or a school which has got the church integrated into it, like C of E school, Church of England school, we've got one down the road, but I never went to a Church of England school. That teaches you, it is for a specific religion. So are they saying that, Church of England schools or, Catholic schools, it's illegal for them not to teach other religions as well? That would be more interesting rather than just schools. But I guess a lot of Northern Ireland schools probably are in one specific religion. So, being someone who is interested in all different religions kind of anyway, right, does that diminish you having a religion or different religions? Well, this is the thing, right? I've always been interested in fact and truth, right? What religions teach, usually moral principles and things like that, particularly in the Christian faith, right? Not to sin or, to be kind or to share things, all those kind of things, right? Like morals. But they used to have moral messages in cartoons, like in the He-Man cartoon at the end, they used to have a moral of the story or whatever. movies always tend to have these heroes fighting against evil forces, and these evil forces usually big corporate entities like, in the Die Hard film, or taking over buildings, or terrorists, or whatever. Look, how about in The Running Man, But in real life, it's not the case. It's like, in real life, well, actually, these big corporations and companies are taking over everywhere. They are robbing us blind, taking all our money off us, and they are implementing all this digital ID stuff. And actually, we're not being heroes, and we're not defeating them. Or, well, we've only just started to do that as these campaign groups, and we're not allowed to act like Arnold Schwarzenegger's fictional character, because that would be terrorism and a criminal, right? The police think that we're the bad people, we're not the hero, but the police are the heroes trying to stop us from stopping the bad guys. But apparently we can do it lawfully by, canvassing and petitioning and collecting signatures and raising awareness and talking about it, right? Which is ironic. They don't actually want people to be the hero, right, and combat the bad guys. The police are saying that we're the bad guys, right? It would be something, wouldn't it be something if the police suddenly, had a revelation or a moment of enlightenment, and each of the police officers suddenly became an Arnold Schwarzenegger and actually went after the bad guys, in the corporate entities and buildings and the people who are taking over the world, like the elite Tony Blair elitists. That would be something, actually, to have a hero cop, a RoboCop, and not just, chasing after, terrorists in cars with guns, like, people who are, the definition of theft, to deprive someone and put something at a loss, while making a profit and a gain out of something by using deception or forcing someone to a policy which is illegal. Would be all right if the police prove, wouldn't it be great if the police suddenly said, oh yeah, all these platforms all these policies are against European rights of convention, and they're forcing consent to accept of people's data, and then the criminal procedure rules are meant to have, you can get a judge to call out why aren't the Crown Prosecution Service doing all this? Why does it have to be like this bloke and his daughter or whatever? These people who are raising these human rights issues, I don't know where they find the lawyers or get the lawyers from. And half of them are people who aren't even English or British anyway. They're coming into the country and using that Human Rights Act to get in here and get rights in this country, right? Or unless it's some sort of gender issue or something like that, someone who's, wants to be a tortoise or, has the right to be, a duck-billed platypus or something like that. They want to change themselves into a frog or something like that. Then they use the Human Rights Act, right? But when we've got these big corporate, massive billion-dollar entities actually forcing us to consent to accept in Europe, but they're attacking us from America and coming from outside. No one's bringing the cases, and then there's a whole digital ID thing that plugs into that as well. And there's all this facial recognition when there's no urgent social need for facial recognition in Croydon, right? If there's, why Croydon? It's security needs are not necessarily urgent social needs. And a lot of the needs of the government are financial, But anyway, going back to this story with this religion, right? The thing with the religion is this. Under the Human Rights Act, when it says that you've got the right to practice a religion, in theory, the point of having the right to practice a religion under the Human Rights Act surely would be that you can practice that religion to what the religion is, how it exists. So therefore they can't actually, that does not have anything to do with dictating what a religion is or should be, right? Because the religion has its own established law, right? God's law or whatever it is, right? Or the teachings of Jesus. The teachings of Jesus are the new Christian religion, right? It's up to the Pope and the Catholic Church to define what Christianity is, because that's their jurisdiction. If the European Convention of Human Rights and the European, Parliament, or even a Supreme Judge, he's not the Pope. This is the thing. Some judges, you got to swear in the Bible when you go into a court, right? And if you use the English model of religion for England, you got the Archbishop of Canterbury and so forth and so forth. It's meant to be integrated into the court systems and so forth, right? Really? This is why they've got the Privy Council oath, and a lot of the other oaths were meant to be because, they don't pledge allegiance to the Pope. They pledge allegiance to Charles, right? He's meant to be the supreme head of the Church of England or whatever, right? And not the Pope. And that's actually got a lot of issues with Christianity when you come to this European Rights of Human Convention, because it's meant to be like the Pope and the Christian Church who decide, at least in the Catholic faith, what Christianity is, right? They decide what it is, and they used to have jurisdiction of the Pope, when you were in England, and that had a lot of issues to do with, Henry VIII and becoming the leader of the church and so forth, right? So it depends which branch of Christianity it is, but this is the thing, the Supreme Court in England isn't actually the head of the church, right? And if they make decisions about a religion, you see, this is when you had the ecclesiastical court, you had the court of Royal Commission, right? So all you see, that judgment which has just been made here, which we're looking at on the screen now, this would have been made by the Court of Royal Commission because it touches on religion, right? And it almost like this. You got the Star Chamber popping up, right? You had a special court for religious matters, right? The highest court for religious matters, and that's when you also had certain privileges for the priests as well. Like they're not allowed to be arrested while they're doing communion and so forth. If they're in, there were certain circumstances where priests had privileges, but then you'd also got the Catholic priest privileges under the Pope's jurisdiction while they were in England, like sort of like diplomatic kind of like immunity. So if you would want to compare it to, you could compare it to diplomatic immunity, sort of. So the Supreme Court judges are not the head of the religion. Because if they could decide what a religion is or isn't, and what and so forth, then they would be the head of the religion. So they're not the Pope, but the king's meant to be the head of the church, even above the Archbishop of Canterbury, right? And the Supreme Court judges aren't Lord Spiritual. So actually, the Supreme Court, those three Supreme Court judges aren't the head of the Protestant faith in England. They aren't. And actually, although they can make legal or judicial decisions, they're not. They don't rank higher than the Archbishop of Canterbury. They don't in the Protestant religion, right? Because, and now this is when you get into Gordon Brown with his stupid Constitutional Reform Act, right? And you've got the Chief Justice can't vote in the House of Lords, right? Because they're a judge, even though miraculously Leveson can give evidence in Parliament, even though that he's a judge. He's not supposed to contribute to political affairs and matters, right? Leveson inquiries, giving evidence before committees and so forth, even though he's a judge, but, he contributes towards votes and proceedings in the House of Lords, right? So there's all that, but the Archbishop of Canterbury is actually ranks higher in religious matters. Otherwise, they're not the head of the church and religion, so three Supreme Court judges cannot actually dictate what... They're not the highest authority in the church. In fact, the king is likely, probably, he's above the Supreme Court. You've got the Privy Council. You've got the Privy Council website, and you can go on there and make claims to the Privy Council. That's where overseas territories make claims to online, not the Supreme Court. They go to the Privy Council. So you likely can petition the king, I would have thought, when it comes to religious matters. So I don't think that the Supreme Court is the highest court when it comes to Protestant faith in England. Well, it isn't. And that's just a fact. And it doesn't matter about the Human Rights Act. That's English law. So the king himself and the Archbishop of Canterbury are actually for the Protestant faith, they're actually higher, but for other religions, I wouldn't have thought so, because it's not, other religions aren't within their remit. But the thing is, the Human Rights Act, the right to practice a religion, means that all the religions are meant to be able to practice freely, right? But I know that Tony Blair knew that all these different religions are not actually compatible, and that's a problem. They're not compatible, because you get, like, some of these Muslim or Islam people saying that, we're not allowed to walk our dogs in our own country and area, because as they come into the area, they're saying there are certain things that, Christians, they don't want Christians to do, or are disrespectful, or they can't do. So you've got a conflict of religions when you're practicing them. Therefore, if you want to pretend that everyone can get along with each other and that you can have all these different religions alongside and they're all allowed to freely practice, it ain't going to work, because some of those religions, their function is to prevent other religions from operating freely, right? Now, this is to do when you've got into the Christian faith slowly developing and evolving, and, and obviously gradually we've got, female bishops and things like that, and obviously even the Catholic Church has, slowly started to evolve and change. But this is the thing, right? And this is the true fact. I don't truly believe that Tony Blair ever believed that all religions can get on happily side by side, because it's not their function, right? It's like saying, well, I mean, if you look at the wild, right? You've got lions and tigers and antelopes and stuff like that in nature, right? And then you get an equilibrium, right, where the lions and tigers are going to prey on the antelopes, right? Because that's their nature. Now, this is the problem, which means that if you make a law which says all these religions are welcome and they can all practice freely, right, then they're going to be preying on each other, because that's the nature of the religion, is to get everyone to follow it, and therefore people in other religions aren't going to be allowed to do what they want. So, but you must have known that when you made the law. So why would you make a law like the Human Rights Act, which says that all religions can practice freely, and should be able to come together? It's not a good idea. Look, right, if you're honest with yourself, and if you're not retarded, you would never make a law which said that all religions had complete and total freedom to practice their own religion, and, and welcome them all together, because you're actually asking for trouble. You're saying, we're going to create a highly volatile situation, right, and actually stir it up, right? Now, your intentions might be, wouldn't it be great if everyone could hold hands and the world could be in peace and so forth, right? Now, this is the fact. Religions, right, this is the main truth of the whole matter. Religions aren't very good for international business, right? Unless you're selling, carved Buddhas or something like that, right? Or, flower necklaces, right? Or, incense. If you're in the incense business, encouraging different religions is good for business, right? But for religions which are against excess and sins and overeating and having too many material possessions, which most religions claim that they're against greed, excess, too big egos, eating too much food, having too many material things, and supposed to be advocating charity, right? Those religious practices and beliefs, right, are absolutely terrible for international trade, profit, business, television, media, selling more material things, right? They're terrible for business, because they say don't buy more things. In fact, share and give things away. Act for charity. Whatever. If everyone gave things away freely and didn't sell them, then that would be terrible to raise money for the government for revenue as well, right? governments, particularly people like Tony Blair, right, who are into international schemes, business, trade and commerce, hate religions. They can't stand them. They're an obstruction to business, right? They need to get rid of them. Now, the best way to get rid of them would be to throw them, if they're in their own country and that religion is exercising itself freely and protecting itself and even growing and is not being challenged or infiltrated by other religions, right? You ain't got any problems, whether it's Muslims or Islam. Now, if you chuck them all together, right, in a confined area like British Isles, which is, limited for land and space, right, and chuck them in like the cockfighting pit, it's not going to be pretty, right? And that's what we've got now. And that is a fact. Now, you can't have all these religions, right, freely exercising themselves equally, because it's not in their nature to do that. It's not in the design of the religion. Now, you can't use ECHR human rights to favour one religion over another, right? Because then you're discriminating. But our country, our law, the courts is actually founded on the religion, and it's embedded into the constitution, into the courts, and so forth, right? And even into the juries, into forgiveness, which is why, Shabana Mahmood wants to scrap juries, right? So we don't have any forgiveness. So we've got automated, fact, like a camera going, right, I filmed you, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this, you haven't paid, you're claiming benefits illegally or whatever, right? And these are photograph, and, and some civil servant says that, because there's a photograph of you doing it, and they access your bank account and take your money back, right? That is what they were doing with the king was doing himself in the, when they had like this Court of High Commission and when they had the Star Chamber, he was just like, I'm the king, right? I was called a court, you committed treason, and I'm taking your lands from you and your house and everything, and I'll hang you as well, right? So that's it, like a judgment, right? And, they might have summoned you or grabbed you or got you there, but sometimes they didn't, sometimes they just made an order. And this is all to do with the right to a fair trial, right? Because, sometimes people weren't getting a fair trial. I think they did actually call them into the Star Chamber, but on a lot of occasions, if you read some of the accounts of it, there was a lot of abuse of that power, and it wasn't really a fair trial. Like, you've got like Henry Burton and William Prynne, right? William Prynne and, Henry Burton are victims of, that type of jurisdiction where, they got mutilated or parts of their, their ears chopped off or whatever for their religious beliefs and practices, and they didn't really get what you would call a fair trial. But I don't think that you get a fair trial with a magistrate now, because the magistrates don't know the law properly, right? They're like volunteers, and magistrates don't even get a fair trial because they don't know the law properly. So if you're like really good at law and you submit a great defence, you might not even need to go into court, but if the magistrate's not properly trained in law, then all your skills, talent, and legal, defence has gone to waste because the magistrate's crap, right? It's useless. And at least if you've got a jury, you might get the community supporting you or backing you up or forgiving you or believing that, you're not guilty, right? Which they were trying to take that away. They just want basically a camera to say, you stole something, you're guilty, that's it, punishment, like automated justice, right? Or even worse with YouTube and Facebook, or some administrator in a Facebook group, right? Just like not liking what you wrote and then just removing you. But then not everybody in the group might have seen it, or not everybody in the group might have even been able to have a say in it, but you've got these admins, and then every different administrator has got a different opinion or a different character, and you don't even really know which administrator removed it, and then once you're removed from the group, you can't even argue with them because you're blocked off, right? So the Mark Zuckerberg way of life is worse. The Mark Zuckerberg ideology is worse than the Star Chamber. Mark Zuckerberg is, I know he's doing, do you appreciate Facebook? You use it, yeah, I go in Facebook groups, but, he hasn't, anyone could have done a platform and just said, everyone can, upload photographs of this or that, what people are interested in, and learn more about stuff, right? It's not like people weren't already doing that, on different forums and things like that. The judicial aspect to it, the way that it's designed, right, socially, is terrible because everyone has become their own authoritarian now. And that's what Mark Zuckerberg wants. He wants an authoritarian hierarchy which goes up where anyone can be a judge on anyone else without a fair trial and without even applying the law, right? And then hierarchy all the way up to Mark Zuckerberg, right? And then he's not even in that country. He's in America and he's administering justice beyond the reach of the law of any given country, right? He's just like, he's got his own law. It's his own law. And you have to submit and consent to it beyond the law of the world's countries, right? Mark's law, submit, consent, accept, right? In Facebook land, this Mark's law, right? And there is no fair trial. And, even if you can submit a representation, you don't even know what staff member assessed it or looked at it. And they don't even have to answer for anything. You don't even get to, have a chance to be present, right? And it might even be a bot, and you don't know when it is a bot or when it isn't a bot. What Zuckerberg has introduced, the concept of it, is worse than the Star Chamber, right, of the king, what they used to have, which they banned it, right? And, okay, we don't have execution anymore, or we don't have, chopping your ears off or whatever, but you might as well have. They're taking all your things. I've got 10 years, and it's not even for leisure or personal use, and it's not even for business. This is evidence of a higher jurisdiction than a police station. It's a investigation to the government about corruption, right? And they've seized it. Americans have seized evidence in a judicial English process. They've taken my evidence, and no one has done anything to restore it. No MP, no Speaker of Parliament, no Prime Minister, no Chief Justice, and I've complained to MI5 now, who are meant to defend this country from foreign threats, right? Where is my evidence and channel? Mark Zuckerberg is the Führer of planet Earth, and I don't care what good he's done. Oh, well, I made you this thing so you can chat. Who hasn't made a platform so people can chat? He's executing overriding directives that override nations and countries' legislation, and Google as well. In fact, whenever I mention Mark Zuckerberg, I'm saying Sergey Brin as well, and YouTube. They're all doing it. Now, what has that got to do with religion? Well, currently, Britain's in turmoil about religion. Now, I don't have a problem with religious education classes teaching other religions, because I thought that's the point in it. But that's coming from the perspective of someone who didn't actually go to a Catholic school or a Church of England school. So I didn't actually ever believe that a school was there to teach you your religion, because as far as I was aware, when you were growing up, if you were a Christian, you learned about Christianity at church, because you go to church, right? So I don't necessarily have a problem with this judgment, because school is to learn about. Church was to do church, or in your own time at home, right? If you were a religion, that was your life, and you went to the religious practice on the days of that practice, like on a Sunday, and you were educated about your schools weren't there to do a religion. So this is an issue to do with Church of England schools and Catholic schools, really, in Northern Ireland. But saying that, the truth and fact is that the human rights article on religion, and this is not any of the other articles, The Human Rights Act on religion cannot be compatible with religions because the nature of religions is sometimes to oppose or eradicate other religions. So if you say every religion has a right to practice itself freely, then you're saying that you're giving it the right to oppose and eradicate the other religions, which is against ECHR. The religions aren't actually compatible with ECHR. Some of them aren't, right? Some of the religions aren't even compatible with ECHR themselves. So how can you have a judgment under your ECHR when their nature is to oppose or eradicate other religions, right? And it's not within the courts didn't create or invent the religions, and they didn't institutionalize them, and they're not the origin of them, right? The leader of each religion and the whatever councils they've got are the ones who decide what the religion is, right? Not the court, because then is the Supreme Court the leader of a religion? Well, no, they're not, right? So this is a problem. Now, the thing is that there's another alternate aim here, which is actually more important to raise. Because in the right to privacy, it says, are there any ulterior motives? In the right to privacy, Article 8, it says in the Blackstone's Guide, there aren't allowed to be any ulterior motives. Well, this is the problem. There are ulterior motives because the corporate enterprise, business, corporations, companies and businesses, right? They have got an ulterior motive. They cannot actually function with religions because religions are against excess profit, excess greed, excess wealth, and they're pro-sharing and pro-caring. Businesses want hard cash. They don't operate for free. They're not charitable. They need to sell more and more things perpetually. And they can't have everyone sharing everything and doing stuff for free because they'll go out of business, right? Now, this is a fact. These big companies, enterprises and businesses, right, are behind this. And they know that ultimately, if they are to continue, none of these religions can actually have any effect or overriding power over them. So that's the real reason why they've been really keen to mix them together at an accelerated rate. Like get all different religions working at McDonald's, right, together. Because McDonald's cannot really succeed if it was to be following any of those religions. Because McDonald's is not an Islamic company. And McDonald's is not a Muslim company. And McDonald's is definitely not a Christian company, right? So why lie? None of these big corporate entities or businesses, whether it's Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg's a Jew, right? So you could say Facebook's a Jewish company, right? Which says a lot for overriding all the laws of the world, overriding, extending itself, submit, consent, accept, right? That would be something to have called out in World War II, wouldn't it? So the truth and facts that the Human Rights Act need to do is say, are these private corporate entities and companies, are they actually extinguishing the religions? And it's actually not the schools. At least schools are if the schools were teaching the religions, but are they teaching people really to challenge the religions? That's the point. So there's a lot of ulterior motives going on here.